I go, I'm putting on. Putting on, putting on. Everywhere I go, I'm putting on. Putting on, putting on. Everywhere I go, I'm putting on. Putting on. Where you from?
Welcome to Popcorn Sports on the Popcorn Entertainment Network. I'm your host, Mike Kyle, and welcome to yet another episode of why you should root for every team in the NBA for the 2018-2019 season. I, of course, am not alone for this series. I am joined by Jeff Siegel. You can follow him on Twitter at JGSiegel. He's the founder of Early Bird Rights, the editor at Peachtree Hoops, and he's also a writer for Forbes, Dime Up Rocks, Fear the Sword, and Blazers Edge. We are here to talk about the Atlanta Hawks today. Jeff, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm great, and I'm really excited to have you on for sure. So let's just kind of dive into the general overview of the Atlanta Hawks. They joined the NBA in 1949, and they moved to Atlanta in 1968. They're called the Hawks in reference to the Sauk Indian Chief Black Hawk tribe. Their colors, which are a relatively new color scheme and a very, very cool one, I might add, red, gray, and bolt green, 46 playoff appearances, one championship in 1957 as the St. Louis Hawks, and they play in the Southeast Division with Miami, Charlotte, Orlando, and Washington. So, real quick, just because I kind of already brought it up, what are your thoughts on the Hawks' new color scheme?
I mean, I like it. I think it's really interesting. I know that, a couple of years ago when they first introduced sort of the triangular uniforms with the little triangular patterns on them, they would mix and match them. So there'd be like the red tops with the black shorts and then the white tops with the red shorts. And it was really strange. Like, it just looked weird. I didn't love that. But now they've sort of gotten away from that. Now they do like either all red or all white or all black. Those are sort of the main colors. They don't have, to my knowledge, like a pure like Volt green jersey, because that would just gouge your eyes out. But I that would be really cool. I'm all for that. I've got some Volt green shoes that I really like, so I'm all for Volt green if they want to go that route. But and they've got some old school uniforms like the Pete Maravich ones, and the ones from when Dominique was doing his thing in the late 80s. So they've got a bunch of different uniforms, but overall, I think I like this color scheme and this logo scheme, especially with the Pac-Man logo. I like that a lot better than the previous sort of stretched out hawk on a ball and the sort of the red, white, and blue color scheme that they were doing in the early 2010s. I didn't love that as much as the stuff they've got going on right now.
Right, exactly. With the whole shift with the new NBA rule where you're allowed to wear whatever kind of shoes you want now, I feel like with the Hawks, especially with their new identity, it's going to be really fun for them this upcoming season. But enough of we'll get into next season a bit later here. Let's talk about last season. It was rough sledding for sure. 24-58, a third overall pick, which they traded back to take Trey Young. What were your thoughts about last season?
I thought last season was a necessary step toward the future. I think they ran their course, of course, with Al Horford and Paul Millsap, and it just sort of that whole process ran its course. Obviously, Horford left in 2016 for the Boston Celtics, and then Paul Millsap in 2017 for the Denver Nuggets, and then they were sort of left with a veteran-laden roster that didn't have the long-term upside that they do now. Kent Bazemore was on that team at the point. He's still around. Dennis Schroeder and Dwight Howard, of course, were brought in. And it's just they got rid of Howard before last season, and then they just sort of went in the tank for a little bit, which is, every franchise has to go through these upswings and downswings. Of course, they made the playoffs 10 straight years. They made it to the conference finals for the first time since they won the title in St. Louis. It was, by all means, that 10-year run was successful, but they were on the downswing. That some of the younger players weren't coming through as superstars, and it was time to hit the reset button.
Right. Do you think that they did themselves a favor by kind of hitting the reset button maybe a little bit earlier than people expected them to?
I mean, I would have hit the reset button a year earlier than they did.
Okay.
As soon as Horford decided to walk, that would have been the time to do it. They had Kyle Korver, they had Paul Millsap. They did end up trading Kyle Korver for a first-round pick that's probably going to convey, either next year or the year after. So that's working out for them so far. But, Millsap, of course, left for nothing. And then, of course, they signed Dwight Howard and had to trade him away. And, they gave the extension to Schroeder, and they had to pay pretty high price in Carmelo Anthony's contract to get rid of him. So, if once they knew that Horford was leaving in 2016, I think that summer was the summer to blow it up, really. Obviously they were being run by Mike Budenholzer at that time. He was the coach and the president of basketball operations, so he was, he wanted to keep his foot on the pedal and try to win as much as possible, which, you can't really blame him for being competitive, for being a coach and wanting to win every game. But for the long-term health of the franchise, I think, blowing it up a year earlier than they did would have made more sense. Of course, there are teams that hold on to it multiple years too long. At least the Hawks recognize, this isn't working. We're going to go away from Budenholzer as the head decision maker. Brought in Travis Schlenk. He hit the reset button. And, as far as what he's been able to do, he's had some hit or miss, hit or miss items over the last year or so. I thought the Schroeder trade was a slam dunk, a home run, whatever sort of euphemism you want to use there. The Jeremy Lin deal was a little bit worse just because they could have had the Denver package that went to Brooklyn instead. But if they don't do the Lin deal, then they never get rid of Schroeder because they don't have enough space for Carmelo. So maybe he had all this sort of grand vision in mind this summer. It seems unlikely that be because of the timing of those transactions, that he had everything worked out before. But, obviously it's worked out very well for him, I think.
Right, absolutely. And that's actually a great segue into what I want to talk about next, and that is this year's roster. So first, we can just start off. You guys bring in Lloyd Pierce, get rid of Budenholzer. Pierce entering his first year as a head coach. And then as far as the roster goes, John Collins, who a lot of people just loved last year, Taurean Prince, Jeremy Lin, Justin Anderson, Bazemore still there. The three baby Splash brothers between Trey Young and Kevin Huerter, Amari Spellman, who they drafted late in the first round, Vince Carter, for whatever reason, decided to sign with the Hawks. What are your thoughts about this roster?
I mean, the roster at least has a lot of wings. I think that was one thing that they didn't have last year. They were very big heavy last year, and they sort of struggled to replace, some of Prince's production off the bench. Prince played all 82 games last season, but if he had gotten hurt, they had no other small forwards on the roster. Kent Bazemore's 6'5", and he would have slid into the small forward role, but they really didn't have any 6'7", 6'8" strong small forwards. Now they've got a bunch of those guys. Obviously, Taurean Prince is still around. Justin Anderson, I think he's only 6'6", but he's built like a bull. He can definitely play the three. He'll probably even play a little bit of four this year for them. If they can get a healthy year out of DeAndre Bembry, he can sort of, fill in that hole at the three position. Bazemore, like I said, can step up a little bit. Vince Carter, who is on the team for reasons that aren't totally clear. I'm not sure how much he'll play. If he plays a lot, that's probably a bad thing for the Hawks.
Right.
Long term, I really think he's around because NBA TV has its headquarters in Atlanta. I think that's the biggest reason he's with the Hawks. If NBA TV was based in Charlotte, he'd be on the Hornets. I think he's really looking toward the next stage of his career, which at 41 is fine. I mean, he's going to come in, he's going to be a good leader. If he plays a little bit at the beginning of the year and then sort of retires, quote unquote, to the NBA TV studios, I think that would be a fine use for that roster spot. And then, they have some guys, coming in on minimum contracts or two ways. Daniel Hamilton and Alex Poitras both can play that three position. So they've got a bunch of wings this year. Because they're a little bit thinner at the big man spots. Dedmon and Collins will be the two starters. They brought in Alex Len for the room exception or for most of the room exception. Those are your three main big men. Where it goes after that is sort of up in the air. Miles Plumlee makes $12.5 million over the next year, and then $12.5 the year after that. So maybe they're going to roll him out. Amari Spellman is not going to be ready to contribute immediately. So, there's some questions at the big man spots. I mean, there's questions across this team. Obviously, the team is not going to be very good this year. If they win more than the 24 games they won last year, that'll probably be a successful season in terms of a win-loss perspective. They're not looking to win 30 games. If they do, that's probably, like with Vince Carter, probably a bad thing for them long term. I think they're really looking to get the highest pick they possibly can. So, there's a lot of interesting spots on the roster. There's a lot of interesting players on the roster. It's still not going to be a particularly good team.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I was looking at as I was preparing for the show is that, just as far as filling up roster space, they've done a good job of it with throwing names, like Jeremy Lin, Justin Anderson. They've put guys in place who are, they're quality players, but they're also expendable when the time comes. And going off of that, I feel like this definitely, I know everybody really feels this way about the Hawks. This year is just about setting the foundation going forward. So with that being said, what rookie or what young player are you really excited to watch this upcoming season?
I mean, you mentioned John Collins as sort of having a guy. He's a guy who had such a really, really strong rookie year, way better than I expected him to be. Even at the end of the season, when I was sort of in the sort of everyday aspect of covering this team throughout the regular season, even then I wasn't really appreciative of how good his rookie season was and how many different skills he was bringing to the table until I sort of took a step back, watched some more film of him, over the summer, watched him in summer league, and really sort of got the feel for what they see in Collins as a long-term piece, as the long-term starting power forward. Maybe he can even play a little bit of center, eventually once he gets a little bit stronger, once he gets a little bit smarter in particular about, especially defensively and pick and roll and stuff like that. But, I think he's the guy. He's one of the later picks, the sort of mid first round picks. They really need to hit on a bunch of those. They're going to have some picks at the top. Trey Young, obviously, if he works out into being a superstar, then that elevates the team into a whole nother stratosphere. But they're going to need to hit on some of these mid first round picks: Collins, Herter, Taurean, these guys who were taken in the mid teens, and you really need to hit on some of those guys as role players going forward. Trey Young is going to be the guy who gets all the headlines, of course, because he's the most famous rookie coming into this rookie season. His rookie season, I worry about him a lot. I don't see him having the space creation ability. I don't think he has got a tight enough handle. I don't think he's quick enough. I don't think he's strong enough to be able to get his own shot off in the NBA. And so that's going to limit his ceiling in his first year until he's able to get quicker, stronger, or has a better handle. He's going to be a good passer from day one. He's already one of the better passers in the league. He's probably a better passer than anybody Atlanta's had on their roster in my lifetime, maybe. I mean, he's one of the NBA's top passers on day one. So that's, I'm excited to see him, with Collins and pick and roll and stuff like that. But, I do worry about his ability to create his own shot. And of course, defensively, he's going to be a dumpster fire.
All right. Well, you just kind of answered my next question, which was going to be, what were your expectations for Trey Young? So you did just kind of answer that. So I'm going to bounce it back to another rookie. What are your expectations for Kevin Huerter this year? And for those who don't know, he's a shooting guard out of Maryland, just lights it up from outside the arc, very similar to Klay Thompson.
Yeah, I think the Klay Thompson comparison is interesting because I think Huerter might have a little bit more skill with the ball in his hands than Thompson. I mean, he's not the shooter, of course, because nobody's the shooter.
Right, nobody is, yes. Correct.
But Huerter can do some things with the ball in his hands that Thompson can't. And it's going to be interesting to see how well they use him or how they use him at all schematically. Are they going to run him off of screens and have him just be a catch and shoot guy, have him just be, a spot up guy in the corners, really just to be a floor spacer more than anything? Or are they going to let him, Trey Young runs a pick and roll on the right side of the floor and then swings it over to Huerter on the left side, and Huerter runs his own pick and roll and has a little bit more creation, responsibilities and passing responsibilities, playmaking, trying to incorporate both of those guys as playmakers rather than just having all the playmaking on Trey Young. So it's going to be interesting to see, how they use Huerter. I think we didn't get to see him at Summer League because he had the injury. So we don't really know what he is at the NBA level. Obviously, Summer League is not the be-all, end-all for a guy in his first year. We're not going to judge him based on Summer League, but it would have been nice just to see him against other NBA competition and just see what he can bring to the table in terms of him, being able to get up his own shot, being able to create, with the ball in his hands a little bit. So, I don't expect him, like Trey Young, I don't expect a ton out of him defensively. That's a theme of this rookie class for the Hawks. Between Young, Huerter, and Spellman, there's not, you could put all three of them together and that's still not an average defender. That's just not what they went for in this year's draft class. They got some, they have some defensive talent elsewhere on the roster, but those three guys in particular are not good defenders. I don't expect a ton out of Huerter. Long term, he's big and he's long and he reminds me of Kyle Korver in that way that, Korver was never the quickest guy, didn't have the greatest vertical explosion, but, just was long. I mean, he was, Korver was 6'8", with like a 7-foot wingspan and just got into guys and was able to sort of use his length to his advantage. I think Herter might have a ceiling like that on defense. Again, that's not a super high ceiling. He's much more of an offensive player. But, in year one, I expect him to, be a solid shooter, maybe get a little bit of that playmaking duty, especially to take away from Young, to take away from Jeremy Lin a little bit, just to give the Hawks a little bit more balance.
Absolutely. That was extremely well said, and I agree with pretty much everything that you just said there, especially with the defense of the rookies of this year's draft class. So the question I ask all of my guests, and the question I'm going to ask you, is how did you get into covering the Hawks?
I went to college in Atlanta. I'm right now, I'm based out of San Diego because I moved back here after I went to college, but I went to Georgia Tech right in the heart of downtown Atlanta. We were basically walking distance from the arena. I walked to the arena most of the games that I went to cover. So it was just something that I got started when I was in school. I went to school with a guy named Bo Cherney, who some of you may know, no longer with us, but he was big in my. He and I were the same year out of Georgia Tech. We took classes together. I knew him really well. He got me started with his site, Hawks Hoop, which is part of the ESPN network, or was at the time. And he sort of showed me the ropes, and it's got me started in this whole writing game. And now, obviously it's taken off for me in a big way. And I owe a lot to him. And and then I moved out here to San Diego, and I just sort of kept going with the Hawks stuff. Now I'm over at Peachtree Hoops. I'm an editor over there. You can find a lot of my stuff over there if you're interested in reading more about the Hawks.
Absolutely, and rest in peace to Bo, who was such a prominent part of NBA Twitter. So let's just kind of shift gears now to the fan base and the fun surrounding the Atlanta Hawks. As I mentioned before, one of the new little fun narratives is that they are the baby Warriors with this year's draft class. But just overall, there's one more thing too. The Hawks, in my opinion, revolutionized NBA Twitter as we know with their official NBA Twitter account. They were really one of the first ones to take the leap and just grab social media by the horns. So just give me some insight on the fan base and the fun culture surrounding the Hawks.
Yeah, I think you can start with the Twitter feed, especially online. They were run by a guy named Jared Wilson, who is he's fantastic. Now he's no longer with the Hawks. He runs the Buffalo Wild Wings Twitter account now, but he's a social media god, basically. He was so good for them, in terms of just getting their brand out there and doing, well on Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram, whatever. So he was a big part of sort of setting up that sort of external culture. Internally, it sort of remains to be seen what their culture looks like. Before this year, they were very much a buttoned-up professional franchise. I think they took after Budenholzer in that way, that Budenholzer was the king of, he came out of the Popovich tree, so every time we would go up there and ask him questions, and he had no answers for us ever. It's just sort of part of covering Mike Budenholzer. I think the people in Milwaukee are going to find that out pretty quickly. He just doesn't answer questions. He doesn't care to answer questions. He comes out of that Pop coaching tree where it's just, we don't care about the media, which is fine. It just is what it is. I think that sort of extended out to the rest of the team a little bit. There were certain guys. Bazemore was great to talk to. Kyle Korver, when he was with the team at Horford, there were guys who were willing to talk to the team, to the media, but just in general, it was a very sort of buttoned-up professional culture with the team. Now going forward, the team is getting a lot younger. Lloyd Pierce is one of the younger head coaches in the league. How that sort of shifts back to it being a little bit more fun and upbeat. Kent Bazemore is probably going to be the leader of this team. I think he was the leader last year in particular, but he's now the guy. He's the veteran on this team who is, as much as Vince Carter is, a 21-year veteran or whatever, Bazemore is the Atlanta veteran. He's the guy who's going to sort of set the culture of this team, especially when, there's a first-year head coach, a lot of rookies, a lot of younger guys, a lot of guys on their rookie contract. It's going to fall a lot on Bazemore, and he's more of a fun-loving guy. He's more of a guy you'll see pop up on social media, pop up on random podcasts here and there. Like, he's more of a guy who will be more open, and I think that's what the Hawks are going to go sort of move toward over the next few years with some of these guys. Obviously, Trey Young in long term is going to be one of the guys who, it's just he's going to be the face of the franchise. He probably already is the most famous Hawk right now. He's the face of the franchise going forward. How he decides to handle himself is going to be a big part of how the Hawks are sort of viewed nationally. John Collins, of course, he pops up in various, fashion advertisements, stuff like that, stuff that we're not used to really seeing from the Hawks, but he's a big part of their culture moving forward. So, I think those are the three main guys who, I expect to see a lot out of in terms of leadership going forward and just sort of setting the tone for the team.
Right, absolutely. And I love Kent Bazemore just as an NBA personality. But let's kind of shift over to Hawks fans in general. What can you make about them?
I mean, there's not very many of them. I think that's the biggest thing that I can say for sure. Atlanta's a very transplanty city. There's a lot of people from all over the country who move to Atlanta for work or for whatever, and so it doesn't, in the city, Atlanta doesn't draw as well as I think they would like to. They certainly are trying a lot of different things to try to engage the community, but I don't think the fans within the city are particularly strong. I think Atlanta's a massive NBA market. When you look at TV ratings for various cities, they're always in the top 10, but then the Hawks are never top 10 in attendance, and they're during this downswing, while they're not very good, they're going to be bottom 5, bottom 6, bottom 7 in attendance. It's just sort of the way it is in the NBA when the team isn't very good, and it's not like the Lakers or the Knicks or one of these big teams. So I think there are Hawks fans out there who are very tapped into the team, who are going to be season ticket holders no matter what. But those are fewer and farther between than a lot of other cities, and I think the Hawks are part of the Atlanta community without being like the headline of the Atlanta community.
All right, that's very interesting dynamic you brought up there, especially with how Atlanta does so well in terms of TV ratings, but then when it comes to actually showing up in attendance at the games, they're toward the bottom. But how is Hawks Twitter? Because obviously that's a very big conversation now about the subcultures for each team and their Twitter. Is there any moment or a series of events that really stuck out to you for Hawks Twitter? Because obviously you are very invested in that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty heavily involved in it. I think it's definitely changed over the last little while. I think back in the day, like we talked about Bo before, and we talked about I think we could bring up Robbie Calland, who used to work for the Hawks and used to write about them when he was living in Atlanta. It was a different time a few years ago, and now it's moved a little bit. It's a little bit more serious, I want to say, than it used to be. I think a lot of the more fun-loving writers who were sort of established the Hawks Twitter culture over the last few years, they've sort of either moved on or in Bo's case, of course, passed away. I think it's become a little bit more serious. I think just because of the way it is, because of the way the team is sort of no longer one of the darlings of the NBA, is now that the team is sort of down in this downswing. It's either a lot of negativity around the team because there are certain people who just don't ever believe in tanking and don't believe in that high draft picks are worthwhile, and then there's some of us who see the logic in the fact that high draft picks are the way you win in the NBA. And so, there are, I think those are the two big factions that I see in Hawks Twitter right now, is sort of the people who are supportive of what they're doing, supportive of trading for Carmelo Anthony and then cutting him, and just because that's part of the plan for the team long term. And, the other people who expect the team to make the playoffs and who expect Trey Young to be an all-star in his first year and don't really understand how, or don't, for me, I'm on the former side. For me, they don't understand that these things take time, and you have to sort of hit the bottom if you want to get back to the top.
Absolutely. So if you are a prospective fan of the Hawks, get ready to pick a side. And with that, let's kind of wrap this up. You have 30 seconds to pitch anybody why they should be a fan of the Atlanta Hawks this season, even though the outlook may not be the brightest right now. Go ahead.
If you really like young guys and you like watching guys develop, and you like watching people pick up different skill sets throughout their first few years in the league, this is there's a ton of young talent on this team. If you're looking for highlights, John Collins is really there. He's going to be your highlight guy. Trey Young is going to have some highlight passes. Hopefully the two of them hook up fairly often, and from there there's not a whole lot of success obviously that's coming to this team. If you want a team that's going to win, this is not the team for you for this year. If you want to invest in a team that might be good 5 years from now, this is the team, this is one of the teams to invest in. If you really wanted to say, I was there back in the day when they won 24 games, then this is this is when you would want to get in on the ground floor of something that's hopefully going to be special in the early part of next decade.
That was phenomenal. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on. You can follow him on Twitter at JG Siegel. He's the founder of the Early Bird Rights and the editor at Peachtree Hoops. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. We're doing this for every team in the NBA, so be sure to stick around for that. And with that, we'll see you next time.